I was just still expecting him to say, you've got a UTI and I'll give you an antibiotic. He said, look, I'm really sorry, but there's cancer cells in your urine. His very first question was, and what occupation have you done? And I said, well, actually, I'm a hairdresser. I still am. And he just sort of knowingly nodded. I went to the toilet one day. I think it was in the downstairs in the salon, and it was a little bit pink in the water. It was the first time I noticed anything. And that happened, I think, twice in a row, and then nothing again. So I basically brushed it off. About a week or so later, I went to the toilet and it was really red, bright red, to the point that I wasn't even sure, where's that coming from? Is it from my urine, or is it from, like, it looked as red as when you'd have your periods? But of course I was at the age that they had stopped, but I still wasn't sure. And it was every time I went, it was bright red. I thought, yeah, maybe it's a UTI. I looked up blood in urine, but everything I Googled said led towards a UTI. I'd never had a UTI ever, and so I had no idea what that would feel like. I had no other symptoms. Luckily, my husband had an appointment with our GP, which is our general practitioner here in Australia, the next week. So I took his appointment, and I actually took along a little sample with me so my GP could see how red it was, because it was just bright red in the sample. He was brilliant. He flew into action straight away, and he said, oh my gosh, no, we've got to send this off for testing, come back in 4 or 5 days. When I went back, and he pulled his chair, John and I always go in together, he pulled his chair to between the two of us, and he said, look, I'm really sorry, but there's cancer cells in your urine. That was such a shock, because it's not something that I was anywhere near expecting. I was in that much shock. I was still just unbelievable. John actually cried. Our GP sat there patting us both. I was still working 2 days a week. Absolutely fell in love with hairdressing, looking after my clients. I bought my first salon when I was only 20.
Lyn spent 50 years as a hairdresser. Her specialty? Hair color. Her passion? The people in her chair.
What is said in the salon stays in the salon. There's so many stories that I could tell about people here, but I never would, of course.
Lyn had no idea the work she loved for 5 decades carried a higher risk of bladder cancer.
As soon as I was diagnosed, I quit that altogether.
Studies show hairdressers have a higher risk of bladder cancer because of chemicals in hair dye products. Those who have worked the profession for 10 years or more are at a greater risk.
So then, as I went into it deeper, I realised more that hairdressing is one of the top professions that are affected with bladder cancer. I do miss doing that, because you get great satisfaction out of making someone look absolutely gorgeous and them saying, oh, I love my hair. I used to love doing wedding on Saturdays, like wedding styles and anything like that, and it just makes them, it's so good to see them so happy.
Lyn wasn't ready for all this change, and how her cancer diagnosis would impact those closest to her.
Probably is one of the hardest things is your loved ones, how they react and telling them. And, that was my hardest thing, having to particularly ring my daughter. Look, I've got cancer. How much easier can you say it? You have to just come out. My son at that time, I had to wait 3 weeks because he was overseas with his wife and 2 children.
The support Lyn grew to rely on came not just from her family. She says she owes a lot to her doctor.
My GP just flew into action. I'm just so grateful, always will be, for him. He ordered an ultrasound and a CT scan, and at the same time said, I'm referring you to a urologist at our hospital that was about an hour away. So by the time you get the appointment for the urologist, he'll have the scan and ultrasound results, which did happen. The next month, I was already booked in for my first TURBT. TURBT surgery. So that went ahead in October. I had seen the urologist, and the only little, well, it's not little, it's a big setback that we had. I have lost quite a bit of weight since then, intentionally, not because of chemo or anything, but I've intentionally set out to get healthier, stronger, and lose weight. I have this tummy, what would you call it? Overhang. I'm not sure what it's called, but extra tummy. And my urologist said he would not do a bladder removal because of that. It would be too dangerous. The other urologists there agreed that none of them would do it. I could have that removed, that overhang, but that is a 12-hour surgery in itself first, and then that would have to heal, and then the bladder removal. So it would be a massive thing. And then he wanted to do a second TURBT to check that he got everything out, and it was found then to be muscle-invasive. So it even now still seems a bit like a blur. I look back and think, like, how did I actually cope with all that? I think it was just one foot in front of the other, one step at a time. So it's been a big year because, to cut a long story short, I had all the treatment, the chemo and the radiation. That was probably one of the hardest times of my life. And I was very much a believer that mindset in facing cancer of any kind is so important and will help get you through. I believe in making ourselves strong. I mean, I'd read and heard a lot, and my oncologist also pointed out that exercising as much as we could, while even if it's just a 10-minute walk, and keeping that strength up was really important throughout chemotherapy. And we did go for, sometimes it was only a 10-minute walk because I'd need a toilet break or whatever, but it still was getting out in the fresh air and getting that sunshine and just feeling good about yourself. So I probably coped quite well with my treatment because of that mindset and that determination, I guess you'd say, of eating well and exercising. My biggest setback at that time was while I was going through treatment in the first 3 to 4 weeks. I had 7 weeks. When I first started, it was like we had a care nurse who talked to John and I about everything that would be happening. And yes, John can accompany you, sit beside you the whole time that you're having that treatment for that 4 hours or so, because that's basically what it was, about 4 hours with the chemo. And that was great. They had tea ladies come around, and he'd have his coffee or his tea, and he was having a great old time. And it was just nice to have someone there. Unfortunately, there had been a head sister, who'd been on long service leave. And when she returned, about halfway through, her protocol was that there would be no visitors allowed in with the people having treatment, unless it needed a translator. That was the only exception. That really tore at me. I don't know why, because I already knew what was going to be happening and all of that. I just did not want to be alone. So it was really upset me for the last 3 weeks of the chemo. The thought of John sitting out in the waiting room for 4 hours or doing whatever, that was probably my most emotional time. There were, of course, times towards the end of the radiation where it really hurt to go to the toilet. There was, I won't gloss over it, there was a lot of stinging and pain when I went. But John was just such a huge support. I cannot imagine having gone through it on my own, how harder that would have been. So having that extra support. My oncologist and radiologist, I also saw once a week throughout that timing. They gave me printouts on what side effects to expect. And they were always there and also nursing. The whole care team were great. Like when I got a little bit tender in that area on the skin, it'd be here, and they'd have creams that they'd give you to use and that. So, yeah, I can't express how grateful I am to the actual wonderful team that I've got. I was actually very, very lucky that I went through that really well. I had 33 sessions of radiation and 7 weeks, once a week for 7 weeks of chemotherapy. The only little thing I had with the chemo was I felt nauseous, a little bit ill a few mornings after, but the hospital had given me tablets that I could take for that, and they worked really well. The only other thing was towards the last couple of weeks of the radiation, my frequency was really bad on the way home. We'd have to stop every 15 minutes, and there's no actual toilet stops between Launceston and Devonport, so it was like squatting beside the road with the car doors open. You do tend to lose your dignity when it's bladder cancer. It really hit me when I finished. So in that first couple of weeks after I stopped, well, for probably nearly 6 weeks, I did break out in a really bad chemo rash, which I would never wish on anyone, and just tired, really tired. So whenever I felt like I wanted to sleep, I'd just lay down and have a sleep. Since then, I'm having 3-month cystoscopes. I was all clear for any tumours. Then the next one was October, just 2 months later, all clear again. It is life-changing because now when we go out, I have to make sure there's a toilet close by. When we're leaving a restaurant, I'll make sure I go before we leave. John has a joke, never let a toilet stop go to waste. I do think, like, I've learned a lot of patience. The waiting is probably the worst. It really is. The waiting for that next appointment, the waiting for the next scan result. So I've learned to live life in those first 2 months. So as soon as they say, no, there's nothing there, like, yay, and go out and do everything we want to do for 2 months, because I still do suffer anxiety building up to that last couple of weeks. I've learnt to try and relax with that and still keep that mindset of what will be, and we will handle it and face it whatever way. So I do believe that, life, you have to live it, and all of us, it's going to come to an end one day. Most of us who haven't been diagnosed with something have no idea when. I never, ever thought that I would have cancer. I don't know why I should think that I was going to be special and not get it. I've never really said why me, because I think, well, really, why not me? If I'd known about the risk of bladder cancer for hairdressers, I would have worn a mask while mixing colours. Even applying the colour on top of someone's head, now, I would have worn a mask while that was, being processed and happening. And that would not have worried the client. So I was sort of a little bit angry for a little while that I hadn't been aware of that. I wished I had been. But then I guess my mindset took over and said, well, what is, and there's nothing I can do about that now. Don't give up just because you've been diagnosed. I mean, fight. You've got to fight for your life, but more importantly, you've got to fight for the quality of life. To me, it's not just quantity. Yes, I'd like to live another 20 years. I'll be fairly old. But I want the quality to be there. Even though I have no tumours at the moment, I'm very aware that it can pop up again at any time, but I still have the mindset that whatever comes, I will face it head on as it comes and do the best that we can for whatever the best outcome might be. I try to walk when I can, but I also go to the gym 3 days a week and try and put a little bit of weightlifting into that as well. I actually probably feel the healthiest I've felt in the last 10 years. Like inside, I feel alive, I feel more energetic, and I feel healthy. So it just goes to show that even with a diagnosis of any type of cancer, that you can still thrive and grow at the same time.